I don't really have a big opening bit for this thing, but we're gonna be talking about Ether this time, because it's something that shows up in every single Xeno game, but quite frequently means something and does something completely different than any other previous time. So basically, I'm just gonna talk about all the different incarnations it has, and what it is in each of those, to show that being an Ether user in one universe or one game might mean something completely different from being an Ether user in another one. This will require spoilers for every game, but before we go into them, I want to talk about where the word Ether comes from and what it refers to in real life. In all the Xeno games, it's spelled E-T-H-E-R, and that just seems to be how it's most commonly used in English today, but if you put an A in front of it like Ike does, it's still referring to the same stuff. Originally, Ether was what the ancient Greeks considered the fifth element, alongside the much more well-known air, water, earth, and fire. It was said to exist in space. The heavenly bodies were made out of it. If you know of the celestial sphere model, it was connected to that too. It was potentially what the gods breathed, and over time, when alchemy started becoming a thing, this evolved into the concept of quintessence. Much later on, the word ether was brought back with the concept of the luminiferous ether, which was a thing in physics from the 17th to 19th centuries. It was a theoretical material that existed out in space somewhere, and could only interact with light, and this is what allowed light to travel through the vacuum of interstellar space so that we could actually see light coming from the stars. This largely started falling out of favor in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and was directly hinted to not be a thing by some experiments, and then was rendered completely irrelevant by special relativity, which pretty much proved that light could just travel through a vacuum without needing any sort of transmission medium. Ether in the Xeno series is probably sort of related to both, because there's some space stuff, there's some fundamental element of the universe stuff, and just based on how it works in Xenogears, which is where the name was first used in the Xeno series, it probably is supposed to tie into alchemy a bit as well. With that, I think we could start actually talking about Xenogears. In the game itself, it's not really explained a whole lot beyond some people have powers called Ether, it's the name of the spells half of your party uses, and people like the elements who are not part of the party can also use it, and they're noted to be exceptional at it. Perfect Works, on the other hand, actually explains what any of this stuff is. In its description, it actually mentions the luminiferous ether as well as a type of chemicals called ethers, but it says that there isn't a direct connection to either of those, and that ether is just a typical JRPG magic system. So, on the surface, yeah, ether is just the word for magic in that world, but the origin of these powers is a lot more interesting because it's connected to the Zohar. In Xenogears, the Zohar has an ability called Phenomenon Phase Shift, which allows it to receive requests from people, things they desire, and using some surprisingly real physics that I don't really want to go into here, but it uses Heisenberg's uncertainty principle correctly. It can basically look at possible futures and manipulate probability so that the desired event happens. Not everyone is connected enough to the Zohar to be able to make requests, and the closer connected you are to it, the more you're able to do. And, of course, the most powerful characters in the verse are all the most connected to Zohar. As in, Nyang, Faye, Id, Groff all have a high amount of connection, Ellie too, and these are also generally the most powerful characters slash the most powerful Ether users. It's heavily implied that the Ether ability only started showing up in humans around the Shivat Solaris War, and that Ether adepts make for better parts for Deus, which is why there's a lot more 500 years later in the time of the actual game. People with connection to the Zohar subconsciously make requests. It might just be, oh, I want to beat this guy in battle, or, oh, I wish my steak was a little more toasty, and they can manifest as special powers. Which means that technically every Ether user is a minor reality warper, but most are unable to grow their powers beyond normal RPG magic stuff. Basically, the Zohar can read your desires, but if you're not very connected to it, it will pretty much just give you some powers so that you're able to better achieve the desires yourself, whereas other more connected characters like the Contact, it will actively manipulate reality to their whims. It also goes on to state that every type of special ability in the game is actually ether, even if it's not called that. Faye's powers are called chi, Satan's are arcane, and Rico's are spirit, but they all come from the same place as everyone else's ether abilities, it's just expressed in a different way. So while Faye might have awakened his powers through his martial arts training, fundamentally, he's connecting to the Zohar in the exact same way as Billy is when he uses prayer to achieve healing, or when Ellie is when she does something she learned in Solaris to shoot fire at someone. It does seem to be possible to train one's ether abilities and have good or bad control over them, like normal magic systems. It's noted that Kelvena of the Elements has to keep her eyes closed at all times because of her extreme ether power that will go out of control if she opens them. Now, extremely powerful feats like Id being able to rampage through gears on foot are also based on requests to the Zohar, so stuff like that is technically ether as well. It's just on a whole other level, even to normal, non-awakened Faye, and a lot of Faye's extreme abilities, like Xenogears itself, is basically just an ether construct put around Veltal too. That makes sense. Some gears can also amplify ether abilities, and this is possibly because gears draw power from the Zohar through their slave generators, which is what powers them, and there's also Aerods, an invention by Solaris, which allow a powerful ether user to use their abilities to control drones with their mind. We see that most notably in Ellie's Aerods being able to completely break the game wide open as long as she's in the party, and I guess that could also make sense where Aerod users might, hey, I'm better at piloting an Omnigear because I've already been able to control stuff with my mind, but I don't know, because we never actually get to play as Ellie in an Omnigear, and it's said that Crescens also uses Aerods, and she never gets an Omnigear upgrade either, so, you know, Xenosaga time. You might be thinking, wait, has he even played Xenosaga? And the answer is, I'm like a third to halfway done with episode 1, but ether is simultaneously the least and most defined it's ever been in Xenosaga, so I only need to know that much, plus the spoilers I already knew about going into the series, to be able to explain it here. This time, ether actually stands for something. It's short for a special theory of rudimentary, and it's basically just a catch-all term for superhuman or paranormal abilities regardless of their origin. According to its episode 1 data log entry, there are two major categories of ether used by that game's party: nanomachines and transference technology. It's explicitly stated that nanomachines are used for healing, which makes sense because Shion's first ether is a heal, and one of the lines she always says when using an ether is open ether circuit, so she probably has a voice-activated thing that can tell nanomachines to, hey, go over there, patch up Ziggy, he's got a hole in his chest again, or something along those lines. Transference technology is probably something more like Cosmos getting her weapons materializing out of nowhere through the UMN. Maybe like that's how guns refill in between battles, or how Junior seems to have infinite ammo in his pistols. Stuff like that would be transference technology, and having an infinite magazine is a superhuman ability, so that would fall under ether as well. There's also a ton of alchemy-inspired abilities that a bunch of different people have, which are probably also nanomachines. That's really the best I could think of. Maybe it's using nanomachines to manipulate elementary particles and weaponize them. Basically, that's what I can think of. But it could also be Zohar-related powers and still be considered ether. Weirdly, some characters' actual ether abilities are implied to be functions of specific machines. Like, Cosmos' first ether is implied to be her changing modes, but you can still transfer ethers to other party members. So she can transfer her mode change ether to Momo, who is a much more advanced artificial life form, being a Realian, or to Ziggy, who's much less advanced, being a cyborg, or to Shion, who is just a human and might only have a few nanomachine implants and that's it. So I don't really know how that works. It is possible that the Zohar also can phenomenon phase shift in this universe as well, not 100% sure on that, and other abilities that are just things people can do because they're not human in general, like Chaos's special powers, might also fall under the umbrella of ether, as well as abilities gained from being close to the Zohar. I'm gonna break the order here for a bit and do Xenoblades 1 and 2 back to back and then X, just because These two are the only ones that have an explicit connection known to canonically exist between their universes in-game. Xenoblade 1 brings us the advent of Ether not just being the name for magic, but actually being a physical substance that exists in the universe and people are able to manipulate to use their powers. Ether is the base unit of all life and seems to be present in everything, not just living objects. I wouldn't go as far to say as it's an elementary particle, but it might be that everything in the Xenoblade 1 universe is made up of ether, or every compound contains ether or something like that, where without ether there would be no universe. It can take a bunch of different forms on its own. Liquid ether is dangerous to the touch and can even damage mechon armor, crystallized ether can be refined into gems that boost people's abilities, and pure ether can even take life of its own on in the form of the nebula enemies. Living beings are able to manipulate the ether around them in order to use abilities. Out of the people of Bionis, Hyantia are the best at this because they're also Telethia, who have the job of taking ether to fuel the Bionis, so naturally, in their non-Telethia form, they also can control ether. Homs do have limited use of it with things like auras, very, very limited attacks with it. Shulk's Light Heal calls on surrounding ether in the air to heal someone, and they could also use Catalyst to control it a bit better like Charla does with her rifle shells, and in addition to that, Napons seem to have figured out how to tap into it as well in a more primal way. Ricky uses plants from Machna and Napon dances in order to help out his abilities. The Monado gets its powers by manipulating ether, and since everything is ether, that's why it is capable of reality warping. Its visions actually come from predicting where all the ether in the world is going to move in the future, giving extremely elaborate and detailed visions since ether is everything. Ether came likely from Alvis and, of course, by extension, the Zohar as shown in Xenoblade 2. Now, this is 100% theory, but it makes a bit of sense to me, where the universe Xenoblade 1 takes place in, when Alvis brought Zanza and Maineth in and gave them their Monados as powers, he brought in all the ether and everything that was used to make Bionis and Mechonis, while the universe beforehand was just the Endless Sea. I say this because we don't know what the Endless Sea is actually made of, if it's even water. It's not really explained there. We know that it's very hard to cross, and it will actually kill you if you try to swim out into it on the Fallen Arm. So what I'm thinking is that Bionis, Mechonis, everything around them was made entirely from ether that Alvis brought over into this universe, while the Endless Sea is the only stuff that does not contain ether and as such is toxic to life, killing it if you get too submerged in it. Makes sense to me. I don't know about that, but basically this connects to the versus battle I'm going to do because of the caveat with Shulk's visions. Yeah, Shulk's visions are infinitely more useful than Rex's foresight, but they rely on the fact that the entire necessary or useful universe to him is made out of ether. If he's in a universe where ether is still present, but it doesn't make up everything, like a rock doesn't have ether in it, he won't be able to predict stuff as well, and it's likely that his vision abilities would be nerfed even if he had the Monado 3. I'm going to run through a bunch of different scenarios in the battle, so I will be taking into account Shulk with visions as he has in-game, and Shulk with nerfed visions that he would likely have if he were put into another universe, but it's just worth noting that, say, if he were plopped into Xenoblade 2, his visions would probably be more on the tier of the ones Rex and Numa are capable of using, just because in Xenoblade 2, ether itself is very similar, but it's not the building block of everything. It's just another substance that exists out there alongside more mundane and real-life ones. Blades and some creatures can use it for abilities. Blades are capable of calling on ether from their surroundings, pulling it into their core crystal. They can transform it into a bunch of different elements. I didn't talk about it before, but elemental attacks are very much a thing in every other game I've talked about. Melia is the best at it in Xenoblade 1. everyone can use elements to a little bit of a degree in Xenogears, and the elements are people who specialize in individual elements, obviously, and Xenosaga attack ethers just have element to them. Ether lines show up on a blade's body when they're manipulating ether, so that's why they have glowy parts, but you already saw my blade video probably. You know how they're capable of using that ether, so not really necessary to go into it again. Ether is also basically the blood of the Titans, and is capable of being used to make things. Core chips are one example, but ox cores are probably also made out of ether, especially because they're the equivalent of gems made from ether crystals in Xenoblade 1. Artificial blades, which I didn't actually talk about in the other video, work by using a device called an ether furnace to fuel their movement and abilities, as well as transferring power to a driver if they're a type of artificial blade that works like one, because some of them are just robots, and Poppy obviously can actually empower Tor like a regular blade. Ether crystals might also be a thing in this universe, depending on how canon you consider Poppy Swap, because ether crystals are the currency for that. As I alluded to before, Mithra's foresight is worse than Shulk's vision because either A, Numa is less powerful than Ontos, or B, not everything is made out of ether, so she can't foresee things perfectly in advance and far out in advance, only predict the near future movements of a living creature that her driver is focusing on, because we only see foresight actually used to predict the motions of people and not play out entire scenes in advance. Unless Ontos is drastically stronger than Numa, swapping them between universes, say, giving Rex Alvis as a blade and giving Shulk Numa as an overseer of his Monado, it's likely that their powers would stay the exact same, including their visions. It is heavily implied that Xenoblade 2 Ether is some sort of Zohar-related fallout to the Klaus experiment. When the space station went boom and life on the Earth was eradicated, ether came down from the sky and intermingled with stuff, and it seems that when he used the power of the Zohar to restore life and finish the core crystals and all that, he used ether as well, so it's probably tied to the Zohar. It is also very, very likely that the phenomenon phase shift exists in Xenoblade 2 as well, because of the wording for the tutorial on Numa's power, where it states that with Numa, Rex can make anything he imagines come true. That's basically, well, it is obviously reality warping. Numa gets her power from the Zohar, so blades, maybe just the Aegises, but maybe just blades, can sort of use the phenomenon phase shift in this world too, and that would imply that all the reality warping done in Xenoblade 1 is also phenomenon phase shift, this time through Alvis. Lastly though, we can talk about X. Once again, ether is an actual substance, but this time it's shrouded in a lot of mystery. It's powerful and versatile, but humans don't know how to utilize it well, which suggests it's possibly not native to Earth at all. And it also means that even Elma's advanced tech couldn't use it properly either. It's present in abundance on Mira, tons of indigens use it as food and energy source or store it to fuel their attacks, and the Igrolith bestiary entry confirms that it does exist on many other planets out there. We also know that Ganglion tech is capable of utilizing it far better than Earth tech, but beyond that, not much else is known, although obviously the sequel hook would imply that if we ever get another game, humanity will naturally learn more about what it is and be able to use it better. So yeah, that's all I got for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This was a bit more tangentially connected to the versus battle than the last one was, but I just wanted to sow the seeds for Shulk's visions not working exactly as you'd expect them to. Again, I'm going to go over some scenarios where they work exactly as they do in Xenoblade 1, and some scenarios where his visions and Rex's visions work the exact same, because for the battleground, I think putting it in the Xenoblade 1 universe would obviously make it super biased towards Shulk, since he can control that absolutely with the Monado 3, so I was thinking flat plane with ether present, but not everything is made out of ether, which would mean Shulk is still capable of reality warping, because I'd obviously put the Zohar in there somewhere, but not to the same degree of absolute power over everything like he had in Xenoblade 1 at the end. But yeah, until next time, this is Luxin, signing off.